So historically in Palestine and the Jews, we're looking at March 1881, Tsar Alexander is assassinated by Soviet socialist revolutionaries, and it caused trouble. By the end of 1881, more than 200 Jewish communities suffered more persecutions for whatever other reasons other than the Jews were never the cause, but they were always blamed for things. By the end of 1882, lovers of Zion groups had sprung up all over southern Russia and Romania, determined to join or to support the further groups of would-be settlers in the land of Israel. In 1882, Leon Pinsker wrote his book Auto-Emancipation, in which he argued that anti-Semitism was inevitable wherever the Jews were a minority, that they could only be a majority if they had a homeland of their own. The impact of Pinsker's book was immediate. The Russian-born writer and journalist Nahum Sokolow put forward specific proposals for industrial development in Palestine. A British Jew, Zerah Barnett, helped found the Mea Sheareim quarter outside the walls of Jerusalem and the Jewish village of Petah Tikvah. The Kattowitz Conference allocated money for two projects already existing in Palestine. Baron Edmond de Rothschild had been drawn actively into the task of giving financial help to all the struggling settlements in Palestine. By 1890, the number of Russian-born Jews who had settled in Palestine reached 50,000. In Jerusalem alone, the Jews numbered more than 25,000 out of a total population in the city of only 40,000. The Arabs, the majority in the sparsely populated countryside, watched with alarm this influx of newcomers from Russia, and on June 24, 1891, the leading Muslims of Jerusalem telegraphed to the Turkish authorities of Constantinople, praying that the entry of such Jews should be prohibited, as not only was the labor market overstocked, but also the Muslims themselves would be greatly the sufferers, as the European Jews, being skilled in all different kinds of trades, the Muslims could not compete against them. As a result of this protest, all Jewish immigration was forbidden by the Turks in July 1891, but after a short while the ban was not enforced. 6. A great and beautiful cause. Between 1881 and 1914, more than 2 million Russian Jews left Russia in search of a secure home, unmolested daily life, and the chance of education and self-advancement. So between 1881 and 1914, more than 2 million Russian Jews left Russia in search of a secure home, an unmolested daily life, and the chance of education and self-advancement. More than 500,000 of these refugees went to Britain, France, and Western Europe. 80,000 went to Palestine, but the vast mass, guess where they went? More than 2 million crossed the Atlantic to the Argentine, to Canada, and to what they call in Yiddish the Golden Medina, the Golden Realm, America, the United States. In Western Europe, there was an equally remarkable flowering of the Jewish genius in the years before the First World War, when Jewish self-help, Jewish community organization, and Jewish participation in national, political, cultural, and scientific life reached new dimensions of activity and success. In Russia, on the other hand, there were official pogroms and secret groups of individuals dedicated to limiting Jewish success, even fostering anti-Semitism. In spite of increasing immigration, these efforts broke out in violence and death for many Jews in 1905. Just getting before the World War I, and it's just no end. Hence, the conclusion of Zionists was constantly reinforced throughout the world. Jews needed a homeland they could call their own. 7. Jerusalem must be the only ultimate goal, 1906 to 1914. During 1906, there were yet more pogroms in Russia for the 5th consecutive year. In the same 10 years, more than 1 million Jews reached the United States from Russia alone. Yet despite the continuing appeal of the United States, the materially more difficult choice, Palestine, still excited those for whom it was not simply a question of somewhere to go, but of a return to the historic home of the Jewish people. In Jerusalem, the Jewish population had reached 40,000 by 1905 and constituted more than 2/3 of the city's total population. In February 1908, the 18-year-old Adolf Hitler arrived in Vienna from provincial Austria. For 5 years, Hitler observed the Jews of the city with a growing hatred, which he was later on to describe in his book Mein Kampf. Hitler's hatred soon turned towards the 175,000 Jews of Vienna, while Hitler was nurturing his anti-Semitic fantasies in Vienna. Now, why would he do that? It was already an atmosphere of anti-Semitism, so he just foisted it and fed it even more. The Jews themselves were continuing to seek in Palestine a new life and new opportunities, all the while denied them in so many other lands. 8. Zionism in the first 2 years of war, 1914 and 1916. With the outbreak of war in Europe in August 1914, the 5 million Jews of Tsarist Russia found themselves allied to the more liberal governments of Britain and France. There was another Russian-born Jew, the electrical engineer Pinhas Rutenberg, who, early in September 1914, believing that Britain would be victorious, was convinced that if a Jewish force could be raised to fight with the Allied armies, there would be a better chance of the Jews being given a choice of the post-war peace conference and might lead to the restoration of a Jewish state in Palestine. The British conquest of Turkey was an opportunity for the partition of the Ottoman Empire, in which was pressed for some form of British protectorate over Palestine in the interest of future Jewish settlement. 9. The evolution of the Balfour Declaration, 1917. The anguish of the Jews when confronted by Christian and Muslim persecution, their own efforts to rebuild and vitalize Jewish life in Palestine, and the realization that a British victory over the Turks could lead to a British-sponsored Jewish Commonwealth in Palestine produced during 1917 the conditions needed to advance the Zionist cause. For Jews all over the world, the prospect of British troops entering Jerusalem brought with it the chance of the first Jewish self-government since before Roman times. On March 21st, the War Cabinet of Britain discussed the coming British military advance into Palestine. Both Prime Minister Lloyd George and Lord Balfour Doctrine, raised sympathetically the question of Zionist aims. It was now widely known that one result of a British victory over the Turks in Palestine would be the furthering of Zionist policies. While Jews and Zionists in both Russia and Britain were helping the Allied cause, in Palestine itself the Jewish population was increasingly the victim of Turkish persecution. Is there no end to it? The Russian Revolution of March 1917, with its call for liberty, far from weakening Jewish nationalism, did not deepen and intensify the national aspirations. The official War Cabinet minutes recorded in Balfour's words as follows. The Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs stated that he gathered that everyone was now agreed that, from a purely diplomatic and political point of view, it was desirable that some declaration favorable to the aspirations of the Jewish nationalists should now be made. The vast majority of Jews in Russia and America, as indeed all over the world, now appear to be favorable to Zionism. If we could make a declaration favorable to such an ideal, we would be able to carry on extremely useful propaganda both in Russia and America. He gathered that the main arguments still put forward against Zionism were twofold: that Palestine was inadequate to form a home for either the Jewish or any other people, the difficulty felt with regard to the future position of Jews in Western countries. Balfour's exposition continued. With regard to the first, he understood that there were considerable differences of opinion among experts regarding the possibility of the settlement of any large population in Palestine. But he was informed that if Palestine were scientifically developed, a very much larger population could be sustained than had existed during the period of Turkish misrule. As to the meaning of the words national home, to which the Zionists attached so much importance, he understood it to mean some form of British, American, or other protectorate under which full facilities would be given to the Jews to work out their own salvation and to build up, by means of education, agriculture, and industry, a real center of national culture and focus of national life. It did not necessarily involve the early establishment of an independent Jewish state, which was a matter for gradual development in accordance with the ordinary laws of political evolution. The War Cabinet's acceptance of what was to become known as the Balfour Declaration made it clear that two pressing and potentially conflicting interests were now in harmony: the long-term needs and aspirations of Zionism and the immediate harsh dictates of war. Hopes and promises. The Balfour Declaration achieved one of the main aims of the Zionists. The return of the Jews to Palestine had been recognized as a legitimate aspiration for world Jewry. But one imponderable condition remained. The Balfour Doctrine, although approved by the United States, France, and Italy, had been granted by Britain alone and would be depending upon Britain as to how it would be implemented. The Jews did not become masters of their own destiny in Palestine on 2 November 1917. That destiny still depended upon British rules and interpretations. It needed also further immigration, land purchase, investment, agricultural and industrial development, dedication, fair dealing, and the continual thrust of faith in the Jewish future and idealism. Britain's military conquest of Palestine was no longer in doubt. Following the conquest of Beersheba on the evening of October 31, the Turks sought in vain to hold Gaza or to protest the approaches to Jerusalem. Gaza fell to the British on November 6, and the British troops pressing forward towards Jerusalem liberated both Arabs and villages in their daily advances. Yet on November 6th, the day of the fall of Gaza, all Lord Hardinge's hopes for the skillful management of the Jews of Russia were dashed by events. In Russia itself, that evening, the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, ever heard of him, entered the capital, and within 48 hours the provisional government had been overthrown. By nightfall November 8th, the new Bolshevik regime had destroyed the Russian war effort by declaring an immediate end to the war. At the same time, by handing over the estates to the peasants, they ensured that hundreds of thousands of peasants would at once leave the army units for their promised farms, thus effectively demobilizing what was left of the Russian fighting forces. Lenin's anti-war declaration destroyed the immediate aim of the Balfour Doctrine in Russia. In the confusion of war, news of the Balfour Doctrine did not reach Petrograd until November 29th. British support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine depended in the first instance upon driving the Turks out of Palestine. A further major step forward towards this took place on December 9th, when General Allenby's forces received the surrender of Jerusalem. Scarcely 2 months after the Balfour Doctrine was issued, the question began to be discussed in London as to how the existing Arab majority in Palestine could be reconciled to any special privileges that might be given to the Jews, while the Balfour Doctrine envisaged at least the possibility of an eventual Jewish majority. It was clear that it would be many years before such a majority would exist. Arab unease arose largely due to a misunderstanding of Zionist aims and intentions. For example, the Arab belief that Zionism involved the expropriation of Arab proprietors and the handing over to future Jewish tutelage of Christian and Muslim sites. But these objections, it was pointed out, had been clearly and emphatically disavowed by the responsible leaders of Zionism. At its meeting on January 19th, the Middle East Committee decided to send out to Palestine a Zionist commission, led by Weizmann, to help in establishing friendly relations between the Jews on the one hand and the Arabs and the other non-Jewish committees on the other. Not only did the Zionist Commission carry out its work in respect to future Jewish developments in Palestine, Weizmann also made a strenuous effort to reach agreement with Emir Faisal, a son of King Hussein and commander of the Arab forces, which were about to declare themselves at war with the Turks. On October 30, the Turks surrendered to the Allies. Palestine was firmly under British military control less than a year after the issue of the Balfour Declaration. Always a struggle. So we have the Weizmann-Faisal agreement next time.